My name is Seth Getz with NuVescor, and we are a mergers and acquisition company, and we specialize in a lot of work with automation and manufacturing companies, having dealt with quite a few companies in the space, and it's something that we is very close to our heart. And today we've got someone talking with us that I'm really looking for this conversation because Paul Neblock is the founder of Breakthrough Manufacturing Technologies, and he is a leading consultant in the manufacturing automation field. Now, Paul has been doing this for, I don't know, 25 plus years. He's been heavily involved in automation. And I think about all the iterations of automation that you have been through, Paul, and the changes in the industry over that time frame, and think about how much it would take to really stay on top of it and be aware of what's going on. It's amazing. But I hear from various companies how you come in and do the analysis. You look at what's going on with them and say this is what you can do to actually take the next step, sometimes small steps, sometimes large steps forward in the area of automation. So it's really good to have you with us, Paul. I'm looking for this conversation.
So am I. You were very nice in saying 25 plus. I've really been doing this for about 40 years, but that's a lot of lessons learned, and I'm very proud of every one of them.
Yep, good. Well, so we're talking about automation, and especially when it comes to doing this when someone's looking at buying a company or selling a company.
Right.
And this is a huge area for them that I think is sometimes overlooked. And I see three things coming out here quite often. One is we are in a marketplace that is extremely tight labor-wise.
Yes.
Almost any manufacturing company that you talk to, they're going to talk about one of their biggest problems is finding people.
Right.
And where this has come up, like right now, I'm working with someone who's trying to buy some automation to some manufacturing companies, and one of their major metrics that they are using to determine what interest they have is what kind of revenue can they generate per person in the company.
Right.
And they're looking at it saying, if we can't generate $400,000 to $600,000 per year per person, then we are not interested in that company. I think of how big of a shift that is from 20 years ago, and how much and so important this is. And then I look at how many companies are right now thinking about, okay, do I automate right now, or do I sell the company and let someone else automate? There's this tension of when do I and when don't I? So talk to us about how automation affects the whole process of thinking about of selling and buying companies.
Yeah, so we run into that all the time. That's a great area of discussion to start with, Seth. So automation now, you mentioned that companies cannot find good labor, and that's across the board in all kinds of industries. So that paradigm shift is still seeping into some companies. What does that mean? That means automation moves from a tactical, well, we can do it or we can ignore it and put it off, to a strategic issue where it becomes, if I'm not automated and I've got high turnover or I've got aging workforce, I'm at risk. And my company has a lot of weaknesses that any M&A firm that comes in is going to look at that and say, wow, you've got a high labor force. You've got a lot of people there that have a lot of skills that are going to walk out the door. And what business am I going to have? And they're going to heavily discount that business or walk away because there's a lot of risk. Taking on someone else's company and then automating, well, that sounds good and it can be done if you spend it, if the purchasing company spends the time to really process these, that could be an opportunity to really increase profitability, increase sales and EBITDA after the sale. But they have to walk in knowing there's some risks, and they're going to have to put some cash in for the automation, and that takes some time to do that, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we talk about what's the right time, right now in this time we're in a very turbulent time of year. We got an election coming up that's disputed. We got people talking about we're in a recession. But if you dig into the numbers, I've dug into the numbers, hard durable goods manufacturers, other than like Boeing, are doing fine.
Mm-hmm.
So the demand is there. The demand did not go away. The economy is not slowing down, and they need people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you have to do it now. You have to step back. If I'm a business owner, understand that it's going to be a multi-year process to
Mm-hmm.
analyze, plan, implement automation in the right way to harvest very high returns in additional revenue, in additional productivity, stability, and in quality, which can also go to the bottom line. And it also insulates that company from anything like another COVID or something like that that may come upon our country. I was in a plastics manufacturer a few weeks ago, chatting with this a general manager about something, and he said one of his customers visited him last week and looked at the plant and said, "Gosh, you guys are behind in automation. If you're not automated in 5 years, you won't exist."
Mm-hmm.
And that's how these bigger entities are looking at the smaller companies from a risk perspective. They'll just de-source them because they know they'll run out of people and they won't be able to keep up with production. So it's extremely important to go now and to bite the bullet, so to speak, and get going. Um, a lot of the automation integrators are extremely busy now. I was at
Yeah.
Automate in Chicago. It was 50% more busy than the prior year. They're
Mm.
super busy. So what does that mean? That means long lead times, which means if you wait, then the line keeps getting longer.
Mhm. Yep. It's not a question of if you need to automate, it's either automate or you're done. Um,
Yep,
and so and you can look at it and say, well, I'll let the next person do that. But I kind of look at that like I bought my first house and I was looking for a good deal and I found this house and guess what? It had an inch of standing water in the basement.
oh my God.
And so you look at almost anyone who's ever going to look at the house, going to say, "Nope, hard pass. I'm out of here." And it's that's what it looks like when they don't have automation. Is like, okay, there is a serious problem here in this company. Do I want to take on this problem or no?
Exactly right. And you know, if people involve, and I've been involved in some M&A evaluations, company evaluations, if you bring in someone like me to go through the business with them, I'm going to be very, very blunt and to the buying company and say, here are the issues, here are the issues. This is a big risk. That's a big risk. Discount, 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 discount. Because you cannot, it's very difficult to fix somebody else's system. It takes 6 months to 9 months just to figure out what you have
Yeah.
and then
So
start from there.
let's talk about some of the misconceptions around automation and the timing of
Sure.
it. I've had one person tell me that they didn't see themselves automating much because the majority of people that work there or the primary people were 55 plus in age. And they're like, oh, they don't want to change. They don't want to do anything different. They don't want to get onto these computerized systems. And so they're just like, no, we're not going to do it. How do you address that? What are some of the other misconceptions along the way as well?
Well, something like that, it's really that's how automation is presented. And I worked many years ago for a company that made paint applicators, and we automated the operation to fabricate paint trays, the metal paint trays you see all over. And it's very interesting automation. At the very last end, two ladies who had been working there 45 years were spot welding the legs on there. And
Whoa,
and
wow.
we had a tremendous joke going back and forth between both of us about automation and what it would do. And they told me everything that worked and didn't work about the process. The truth is that most of the people who have been there a long time don't want to do that. They don't want to wear their bodies out. They're happy to do something else. If you involve them in the process and show respect, and joke around a bit, they're happy to go along. There may be one or two, but typically that's not a problem. Typically, quite frankly, and this may sound bad, it becomes management, and that can start at general manager and below or whatever, that is hesitant to do it. Either there's a failed project over in the corner because it was done wrong, or people don't take budgeting for automation seriously, so they tend to under budget, and then they come in and say, I've only got so much in my wallet to spend. And then you find out that's about 2/3 of what it needs to do the job right. So they start cutting corners, and then you have something that's kind of half baked. Everybody on the shop floor sees it. Everybody knows it. Don't make those mistakes. Either step back and do it right, budget it right, do it right. Know that the justification model has changed, and you'll be fine.
All right. So let's talk about that justification and kind of how do you rationalize? Because we're talking a big investment here. We're talking in many cases millions of dollars going into this thing, and you could start from one spot and increase it over time, stuff like that. But we're talking a significant investment. How do you think about that terms of investment, and when do you do it, and how much lead time do you need to do it before you actually want to sell the business?
What I would say is like we talked about, when you sit down and you're doing strategic planning, or even before as you're doing strategic planning, you go through a process of automation assessment whereby you go through your product lines, where you're making money, where you're not, the 80/20 kind of stuff, right? And then you actually go through what are called the value streams, how those products are made, and intensely look at those processes and say, where are the opportunities to automate and perhaps innovate, do some things differently? And then what's the impact going to be? And this can be at a budgetary level. We don't have to get down, to the fine level. And that's then going to tell you, okay, here's the 2 or 3 projects or 4 or 5, whatever they are, in a sequence over time that makes sense. Get the right budget put together, and then you've got a justification. And here's the justification, and I'll just talk about it. We won't have to do a math model for it, but first thing is you really have to look at your business and say, if I'm losing people or I can't keep people, what's the impact on my business? You have to sit around the table and say that. I am going to the growth curve is going to go down first, right? The growth curve is going to go down first. So you have to factor that in. Second thing is you're going to lose baseline business because you can't keep up. You can't keep up. So if you take 2 or 3 or 4 people out of the line, and I was talking to a gentleman yesterday about a trailer builder where they have a whole bunch of hitch welding lines, and they got very experienced welders there. But if 1 or 2 or 3 of those guys don't show up in a given day, what happens? They don't make any trailers.
Right.
And they told me what they were doing for it, because their impression was that they couldn't automate it. It's wrong. But they were going through a whole training process, bringing a bunch of people in, training them how to be welders, all that good stuff. And then he lamented to me, he said, well, that's great, because about 2 months after we train them, 2/3 or 3/4 of them get up and leave to other industries that are paying more.
Yep.
And that's common. That's common, right? Labor is going to move to work and get that. So first of all, you're going to lose growth. Growth curve is going to go down. Second, you're going to lose base business. Third, productivity is going to go down. So you have to look at your metrics, and you look at that metric you mentioned, which is extremely important, revenue per person. Because if you find out that your number of people go down, your revenue is going to go down. Right? And if you have people that are not as experienced or productive, your throughput goes down, your revenue goes down. And that's kind of an all-in number. And you can do some what ifs on that, and pretty soon you find out that the picture looks pretty ugly unless you automate. And you can't bring it back. And once you lose customers, it's very difficult to bring them back.
Yes. Yeah. What are some things that are like obvious points that you would, as you look at a company and you say, this is evidence of you not automating, or this is evidence of there is a massive opportunity here for you to automate? What are some of the things that you see both in numbers and in just walking the shop floor that you, if you see this, like, okay, you have got so much opportunity to improve right there. See that?
Yeah.
That number, that spot, that equipment, whatever it is. Tell me about that, what you see, and how can they can see that themselves.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the number you talked about, the revenue per head count. If you can get to the point where you can estimate that by product family or value stream, right? Because some companies have lots of lines and the numbers get all jumbled and they don't mean much. But you'll find for each line, there's a separate number. And some lines, they're a lot more labor intensive than others. You'll see that visibly, and you'll see the revenue and the productivity per head in that be radically else. And you'll say that's a big opportunity because there's low productivity, low throughput. People are struggling. You're probably going to have a lot of turnover. Quality is probably going to suffer. You got all those areas that factor into high costs and low revenue, and those can be some things you want to do first. But those are things you'll see from the numbers. Also, walking around a facility, if you see people picking up and putting things down a great deal, whether it be cartons on pallets, that's a common thing, or loading machines repetitively the same way. Those are obvious kind of things. But I was actually talking to someone yesterday about doing things like maybe assembling hydraulic hose assemblies with special fittings on the ends. And they make them by the thousands, but there's a lot of variety there. Things like that can be automated, but from my mind, you have to look at it very differently because you want to make a system that's flexible and that can really be reconfigured for as models change over the time period, and you can really then make a big impact on the business.
I think about, you talked about when people are moving something, and I was recently in an agricultural facility where they have egg production, and they've got all the eggs from all the hen houses coming to one big machine, and that machine was a massively automated machine. It was really amazing, all the automation it had. But at the end of that machine, at the very tail end of that machine, was a person who would take the cartons of finished eggs, I mean, all set, and had to put them onto boxes or onto a skid or onto whatever it was. And it was a person who would unload this machine. And so they looked at it and said, we've got to do better than that. And so they had a robot arm that was able to either put it into boxes or put it into a pallet or put it onto a whatever different method they had. And now they took it to the point where the person involved was only there to wheel in another skid or carton, and that's it.
Right. That's right.
And pretty soon they're going to automate that particular set, but they got this one thing of repetitive movement taken away from. And that was the step of automation for them, even though they had part of it automated. Well done.
Yes.
They took the next step here. Is that kind of what you're talking about with that?
It is, because you cannot do it all at one time. No company can ingest that. Those that have tried to ingest it, there was a famous company, Snap-on Tool, that tried to ingest that and tried to automate their entire factory in Texas earlier this year, and they closed the facility after failing and spending God knows how much money, millions and millions of dollars, because they tried to automate all the processes at one time, forging and heat treating and finishing and plating and assembly and everything. That's too much. That's too much. You got to plan it out and do it in pieces that make sense and involve the people that work there.
Yes.
They know the processes better than anybody because they live it. And if you respect them and humble yourself and go to the Gemba, so to speak, learn it, they will tell you all kinds of stuff that goes on that you need to know when you automate. Sometimes these things are crooked, or sometimes this is off, or whatever. and you find out that those are risks that you got to take into account. So yeah, those are great examples, and I've seen that in all kinds of manufacturing firms. Um, I've been in some that are what I'd say high volume, but high mix, a lot of changeovers. And some people hesitate to automate because they don't know how to do that, because there's a lot of complexity. So we know how to do that. We help people through the process. You can't put too many different models or variations in one system or one cell, or it fails. And there's a balance there you have to kind of work through.
Yeah. We've gone through, I could think of a few different iterations of this in the business world. In the late 90s, we had the .com craze, where every company there was trying to attach .com to whatever they did to be able to seem like they were on top of things. It was, and right now we're going through the phase where every company is throwing out the word AI and just trying to tag on AI, saying, we're doing AI. And you realize it's BS, and it's just.
It is because, first of all, AI presumes that the information that's being pulled into the system is correct and timely, which in most companies is not. So garbage in, garbage out. And then the algorithms that drive AI, if you don't understand what's behind them and you're trying to make decisions based on those, you're fooling yourself. But yeah, it's kind of the sexy term. The one prior Internet of Things, like everything was connected to the internet, all the machines and everything else, so they could all communicate back and forth, which is great, except when the internet goes down in your system or somebody hacks you. So I mean that creates other issues. But yeah, it's I think it's more smoke than there is substance there right now. I think a lot, if you look at the number of manufacturers out there, especially small to medium sized one, there is so much opportunity to go into those businesses, automate them correctly so that they get a much more solid foundation for manufacturing, their higher productivity, their higher throughput, their higher EBITDA, their higher value. Just put the sexy AI stuff off to the side and come back in 5 years. It will have changed its name to something else.
Yep.
And you'll have a tremendous business.
Yeah. Yep. So we talked about the absolute need that is strategic level. You do not have a business if you have not automated your manufacturing process.
Right.
And when it comes to selling the business, that's what they're looking for, is a good, solid business is one that has automation. Now, sometimes that does not mean you have to go to the nth degree of automation, but you have to have made progress in that so you are not completely left behind. And then we talked about the status of how to measure this, and using that one measure of revenue or profit, either way, per person, and looking at saying, how do we increase this? How do we make a significant increase in this thing? Because we cannot always find the people we need to find. It's not just a problem of we grow the business by hiring new people. That model does not work anymore.
Correct.
So then you talked about how we can just see some things by looking around and saying, where are people repetitively touching the product over and over again? And then we look at welding as being a huge example of this, that I think is coming more and more, where it's been a person who does it, and we need to have that be automated, but just movement of parts on and off, up, down, around, anything like that. We've got this. Any other things that you look at and say, this is something to consider as you're thinking about the long-term prospects of your business and the idea of passing it on to someone else in automation?
Yeah, there's a lot of companies who consider themselves what I call job shops or high mix environments where they consider every job's different than the job before it. Nothing's the same, so automation doesn't apply. And that mindset needs to change, because I've been in dozens and dozens of them, and you have to first of all change your mindset and look at their pattern of jobs over the period of years. You find that there's a lot of repetition, and there's a lot of what I call product groups or families of parts that are manufactured the same way. There might be a different hole here, a different hole there, or a different ear on a weldment here or there, but everything else is the same. So that's where there's some art to this, and that's where we come into play is how do we help people see that?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have some emerging technologies that we're involved with. You mentioned welding, so I'll give them a little prop is Abagy Robotics, Abagy Robotics, has come up with a system whereby with vision and some other technology within the welding, they can actually set up and weld a high variety of different parts without having to go through and touch program every one.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen that, and that's gonna make a big difference for these shops if they're smart enough to invest in that, because you won't have to then have the expert welder setting up every one. You'll have to be able to tack it up and put it in a position, but this thing can see it and however it's laying and do the welds and be done with it. And that's super technology that people are developing out there like that. And that's something we stay on top of all the time, because that's what we're trying to find those solutions for our customers. So we'll actually be doing a webinar with those guys later in October about that and how it impacts high mix environments in welding shops.
Yeah, I think about just digging a little bit into the welding idea, because the ideas we're talking about in automation can sometimes seem like they are impersonal, and we've talked about them in terms of it being a, revenue for the business and more efficient for the business, stuff like that. But I've seen this over and over again where it gives people much more, it helps their life quite a bit, because I've talked to people who, when they were young, they loved the art and the craft of welding, and it was a beautiful thing for them. And then you give them 20 years of doing it, and they start to realize that their body starts breaking down.
Yeah, it does. It
And
does. Both from UV light
yep,
and the fumes and the heat.
yeah,
And I know a lot of people in the business. I have a brother-in-law who did welding of these big tanks, and lots of other people went through the same change. And I harken back all the way back to some of my early industrial career at Heister Company, where we had some real grizzled veterans doing welding for forklifts, and I helped them develop some simple automation. Just put the welder here and it walks on a track, and
mm,
that's
mm,
$300 to do that. And they were so happy to not have to drag that welder back and forth all day,
mhm,
that they remembered that
yep,
it changed their quality of life. So I think getting people involved like that, showing them how their work is going to be much easier and much safer, I think you get a lot more people on board
yes,
to automation.
yep, I agree. Well, Paul, thank you so much for talking and stuff through with us, and I look forward to work with you on some new companies as well here.